everyone, my name is Ali, and for those who know me know that there isn't a topic that I love more than champagne. Now, not just for the effervescent liquid inside the bottle, but the place in which it gets its namesake, champagne. The region itself dives into a beautiful history, devastating, romantic, and time and again resilient. Now, a lot of us already know the stories of our brands, especially those in the 100% Club. But I'm diving in a little bit deeper and discussing how champagne came to be where it is now. And from there, I will also discuss the evolution of champagne glassware. So I hope you guys enjoy it. To start this story, we need to go to the end of the 3rd century, when the Romans had finally lifted their prohibition on champagne and vine growing was introduced to the region. Now, at the same time, this is when Christianity was growing, and with this was the abbeys and monasteries throughout the region. And with those monasteries came large vineyard estates. Wine was necessary for the clergy, as well as, for the monks' own wine consumption. But it was a great source of income for the clergy. And these wine estates would be based along major trade routes in Champagne. First and foremost, Champagne was famous and notable for its trade fairs, well, the medieval trade fairs. And people from all over Europe would come and trade their goods from all over Europe. Textiles, wool, all kinds of goods, but especially wine. But it wasn't just famous for these medieval trade fairs. It was the place that kings were made. The Reims Cathedral was the place of the first coronation of a Christian king, which was King Clovis, king of the Franks. And with this, great celebrations were had. Banquets that would go for days, wine overflowing. And it wasn't just any wine, it was champagne wine. So statesmen, ambassadors from other courts, from other countries, any sort of hierarchy would be attending these events, all drinking champagne. But it was champagne before there was any effervescence in the bottle. So even before it had sparkled, it was a celebratory wine. The next part of the story is champagne's metamorphosis from still to sparkling wine, the so-called devil's wine. Now, after a series of technical innovations which changed the champagne making process, which was short pruning, vine selection, and most importantly, blending. Now, our own Dom Pierre Perignon pioneered this process. He invented a way that he could blend different varieties from different vineyards to get a better finished product. Now, it wasn't until the 1660s that new pressing techniques came into play, where now that winemakers could create white wine from black-skinned grapes. And this is when effervescence came into the story. As Champagne is considered the northernmost region viable for grape growing, it wasn't uncommon for harvest to happen as late as October and November. By this, once the wine was put into barrels, and at the time wasn't cellars, the winters would halt the fermentation process, and when spring would come, reawaken this process, giving the wine a slightly sparkling quality. In this process, blowing up barrel bungs and creating all kinds of havoc. Obviously, at the time, this was considered a flaw. Thankfully, the winemakers were very happy that the gas would eventually let out from the wine and become still again. 17th century is when glass bottles came to be, from the change from wood to coal firing for glass furnaces. Now, the result of this was stronger and tougher glass, being able to hold the wine in storage. Now, this wasn't just for a vessel to be served at a table. Now they could move and transport wine within the bottles. With the fermentation occurring as it did in the barrels, reawakening in spring, there was actually no place for the gas to escape, so it dissolved back into the wine itself, creating effervescence in the wine. Now, this actually became a popular and high-demand product with the highborns. Again, this new, sparkling and interesting wine that elite clientele were completely after. And don't get me wrong, the Champenois were quite happy to assist and supply the sparkling wine, but there were many, many obstacles in between getting the bottles from the cellars to the clientele without many accidental explosions. Not until 1848 did the dry style of champagne actually start being developed. Only a few houses dabbled in this, And the reason was, a lot of the time to hold the amount of stock that needed to be produced for a certain year took too long, and a lot of the houses couldn't afford the uplift. Now, at the time, champagne was produced much like wine, within the year and pushed out. And with this, grapes were harvested quite early because of the unpredictability of the Champagne weather. And being harvested quite early, there was a lot of flaws in the wine. So to be able to mask those flaws, they added a lot of syrups, creating the known style of champagne to be very sweet. Now, it wasn't until, if we're fast forwarding a little bit further, it really wasn't until the 1870s that the market demanded for dry champagne, and it was the English market that really pioneered that. But again, getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, so I'll have to wind back a bit more. From the creating of the effervescence to the resilience of the region. Now here are our obstacles. Champagne was no stranger to war and bloodshed. Actually, time and time again, this place was devastated by war. But if we went through each battle, we would be here for hours. But the one thing I would love to point out is the French ambassador to the United States, Paul Claudel, mentioned, "In a little moment that remains between crisis and catastrophe, may we all have a glass of champagne." Now, I think this sums up the region perfectly. Champagne had to recover from devastation, time and time again. But the region, it was a region of resilience. It worked harder than anyone else to maintain its greatness. I want to fast track to the era of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon's reign as emperor lasted from 1804 to 1814, not long after the heads of Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI's heads rolled during the French Revolution. Not long after he gained power did he declare himself emperor, but I'll need to skip ahead to the beginning of the end of Napoleon. Napoleon's relationship with champagne ran deep, which was evident in his everlasting friendship with Jean-Remy Moet, which was Claude Moet's grandson. This relationship led to his tradition of passing through Champagne to see Moet to grab cases of champagne to each battle. It was a tradition which only broke when he didn't pass through on his way to the Battle of Waterloo, which we all know was his final defeat. Waterloo and the Franco-Prussian War were the end of Napoleon's reign, which he did not recover from. The first of Napoleon's exiles was his defeat of the War of the Sixth Correlation, which led to the Russians' takeover of the Champagne region. The Russian invasion in Champagne saw the region robbed almost every cellar dry, and one cellar in particular was hit harder than others, and that was Moet. Now, Moet saw almost 600,000 bottles taken. In the hysteria, he was known to remain calm, because he believed in an old French proverb. Now, I won't say it in French because I'll butcher it, but basically it means, "He who has drunk once will drink again. For all those soldiers who are ruining me today will be my fortune tomorrow." So Moet told his friends, "I'm letting them drink all they want. They will be hooked for life and become my best salesmen when they go back to their home countries." This became true. So after the battle, the victors would return. A lot of the winemakers claimed that they would see a lot of the victors come back wanting to try and learn more about the champagne. They were so fascinated about this sparkling wine. One even came in to be a champagne buyer for the royal courts of Russia. So the Tsar would send in different diplomats to go in and buy champagne as a result of the occupation. Champagne bounced back from this first devastation. Not only did they bounce back, they grew insanely. Sales were amazing, the traction of reputation was even better. Champagne was believed it was standing on top of its golden hours, and champagne was finally included in the French dictionary and defined as a wine produced by art. Now, unfortunately, all this changed with Napoleon III. Now, in times gone by, there was still quite a lot of tension between Russia and France. A lot of civil wars in between, a lot of issues, a lot of tension. And Napoleon III is actually gaining a lot of reputation, and he was, people were quite happy with him because he was putting in train lines, roads, especially through Champagne. All that began to change when he declared himself emperor. And not soon after that, on July 19th, 1848, he declared war against Prussia. The Franco-Prussian War was said to be the bloodiest of the century. With Napoleon's march into Sedan being his ultimate downfall, with then the government and national events taking power in Paris, and then military occupation from the Russians happening in Champagne. The occupation was met with great hostility, a lot of uproar, a lot of demand, a lot of fights. There was blowing up of train lines and roads, which Champagne was exported from, putting Champagne in an economic standstill, and France in great devastation. Finally, after quite a long time, France decided to sign the peace treaty and demands of Prussia, which almost sent the country into complete bankruptcy. Of course, the region would bounce back. And this is during the time in 1870 when I was talking about the fact that dry Champagne style was really being developed. And a few houses at this point were dabbling in it. The English demand is quite high, so even though they would not even sometimes label the champagnes where the houses came from because it was still in development and they didn't want to ruin their reputation, this is at that point when that dry style was beginning to come into play. Now, even though this was after some time, Champagne was still very far from bloodshed yet. France and Germany had declared war, and this was the beginning of World War I. It was said that the front lines cut through the Montage de Reims like a jagged knife. Now, there were 5 battles of Champagne, which lasted from 1914 to 1918. It was estimated that around 40% of all Champagne vines were lost, and the city itself was flattened. Upon the success of the German occupation in Champagne, the people of Champagne hid underground in the cellars. Now, the Germans wanted the region to go back to normal. They believed that they held Champagne by its neck and thought this would be very profitable and that they owned Champagne now. Now, this dream soon came to an end as Epernay and Reims were soon liberated only a week after the German occupation. But unfortunately, only a few days later did bombs rain on the city, forcing civilians to go underground, over time destroying the city almost completely. The Crayons became home to more than 20,000 people and a place of protection. All Champagne operations were brought underground, and troops and anyone involved in the war was sent to Champagne to fight off depression. The commander that was posted in Reims was actually even forced to retreat. But he denied it, saying, "As long as there is Champagne, we will stay here and defend it." And that's exactly what they did. For the next 3 years of 1,000 days of shelling and bombings, the collapse of Epernay and Reims, the war ended on November 11. Reims, the devastation that was left was incomprehensible. Reims was flattened to nothing. The cathedral left a shell. Epernay almost concaved and pillaged to nothing. And if that wasn't enough, winemakers now had to deal with an uprising in Phylloxera. And that is when the Champagne community started to rally together and rebuild its community once again. Now, about 2 years after the war ended, Champagne sales roared, and the prohibition commenced in the United States, and the Roaring Twenties began. Champagne sales rose dramatically, thanks to bootleggers, smugglers, and gangsters, all sort of smuggling in Champagne to the United States. Now, of course, this was all done through middlemen, and so to not taint the names of the Champagnes to their friends in the United States. But they were making profit like never before. This was because there was no import or export tax, so the profit was just going up and up. Now, all of this changed when the stock exchange fell and everyone went into the Great Depression. This hit Champagne to new lows, and it was said to be that there were 150 million bottles of Champagne waiting to be sold in the cellars. An unlikely savior that helped Champagne sales rise again was our own Perignon, almost 200 years after his death. Now, Perignon was a quiet, hard worker known for his unparalleled still wines. Now, most of Ovier was pillaged during the French Revolution, but a young group of entrepreneurs wanted to get Champagne back to its former glory, wanted to create a celebration marking the 215th anniversary of Perignon's invention of Champagne, or sparkling wine. Thus, the quote we all know so well, "Come quickly, I am tasting the stars," which is a little bit of a teaser for my next presentation, which will be Champagne Mythbusters, but I digress. This celebration was not going to let facts get in the way, and wanted to relaunch the love of Champagne. thus, creating this proud moment that we created this. This is our product, and champagne sales did rise. This party went throughout, it did start in Auvergne, but went throughout the Champagne region. It went into Paris, into France, and initially we see that champagne sales rise again. But unfortunately, as per usual in this story, once it goes up, it must come down. And the moment of happiness in the region was soon over as talks of war loomed in the air. The commencement of World War II was now the third war against Germany in 75 years. Champagne this time was better prepared, storing away all their bottles under religious monuments, boarded up behind walls, and hidden away in cellars far away from their own region. Now, once the occupation of the Germans took hold once again, the one positive note is that the front lines were just beyond Champagne, and the fighting didn't come through the region. However, its wines were seized for the supply of Wehrmacht, and the champagne sales were only supplied to German-controlled restaurants and hotels and cafes. All champagnes had to be stamped, reserved for Wehrmacht, clearly stating that Germany had first right to all champagne sales. Essentially, this was legalized plunder. And in just 4 years, the champagne houses found themselves obliged to sell several dozen millions of bottles to the German army. Moet actually played quite a vital role in the downfall of the German occupation in Champagne. So Robert Jean Deveau, who ran Moet de Chandon at the time, headed the political wing of the French resistance in eastern France. When found out, he was brought before a tribunal and sentenced to death. Now this death sentence created an uproar throughout Champagne, and all houses went on strike. When the power heads in Champagne from Germany realized they weren't going to meet their supply demands in Berlin and throughout Germany, they had to lift this death sentence in order to keep the champagne houses running. Not long after D-Day did German forces retreat from Champagne, thanks to the US military taking them by complete surprise. From there, the wait for the treaties to be signed and the war to be over. It was said the last explosions of the war were the opening of Champagne courts. But once again, Champagne was left pillaged and had to rebuild itself from scratch once again, since most of the cellars were now empty. Now, it was only at the beginning of the 1950s that Champagne shipments returned to their pre-World War I shipment levels. From 1954 to 1975 were the gold years for Champagne growth, also known as the 30 glorious years. Now, the liberal climate adopted by an ever-evolving Europe, Champagne sales rose from 30 million bottles sold every year to 300 million bottles sold every year, thus resulting in Champagne as we know it today. So through continuous devastation, Champagne was able to rebuild itself over and over again, and another reason why Champagne is as glorious as it is. Now, I don't know about you, but I do not know a better landing than that. Now, if anyone else is wanting to learn a lot more about what I've discussed today, my favorite book that really talks about war and devastation and how the houses were involved in all of this is Champagne, and the authors are Donna and Petit Glassware, and this is an amazing book to read because it really discusses the involvement of different champagne houses throughout the wars and their contributions to helping the region. So I definitely highly recommend reading this book. Another book I would also really look into doing is Champagne: A Secret History by Rob Walters. This takes a little bit more of a sort of grower pro feeling towards Champagne, but the history in there is still exactly the same. But I really do recommend, if you ever get your hands on this book, Champagne, 100% definitely read it. For the second part of my presentation, I'm going to be discussing the evolution of the champagne glass. Now, unlike other wines, for some reason, Champagne's glass has changed in shape so dramatically. So I'm going to start off with the Champagne Coupe. Now, as the story goes, the Champagne Coupe was invented on the shape of Marie Antoinette's breast. And as lovely as a cocktail story this is, it couldn't be further from the truth. Another little tidbit from my busting champagne myths. But the Champagne Coupe actually dated back before Marie Antoinette's time, to Louis XV. So Louis XV had a painting called The Oyster Lunch, which I know is actually quite important to Runa as well. But for the facts of this story, it actually depicts a champagne coupe. But the champagne coupe looked a little bit more like this. It had a deeper dish and a longer stem. Now, champagne back then wasn't savored the way we do it today. It was actually shot back like tequila. So they would all cheers their glass, knock it back quite quickly, turn the glass upside down, and then allow the sediment to drain out of the glass. Now, we all do know that this is champagne because there is a sort of scene within the painting that depicts a bottle under pressure, which there's three men looking up at a cork in the sky and a man holding a bottle. So that is the first sort of indication that the bottle was under pressure. Now, fast forwarding a little bit in time, even though in the 1920s and all those sort of raging 50s, people still use this glassware, but before then, it was actually used a little bit differently in the same sort of way but evolved. The dish became wider and the stem shortened. This was because champagne still had sediment in the bottle. And so the consumer would use the wide dish to allow the sediment to be caught within the concave or nipple, as they had said, and the consumer could drink around the glass. But today, the champagne coupe is just a relic and maybe a show tool for champagne towers or just a little bit of decorative something special for a great occasion. But when it comes to the way the champagne is now, it does nothing for the wine itself. Now, the next glass that I'm going to discuss is the champagne flute. Now, it wasn't until the invention of the riddling table did the champagne flute come into the scene. Thanks to the innovative Madame Clicquot, finally figured out how to get the sediment out of the bottle. But how the flute actually came into invention is not clearly stated. One indication is that the shape was actually invented in Italy in the 1600s. And it was also documented in the 1700s that the Russians would drink wine out of a flute or trumpet-shaped glass. But the flute itself is said to be requested, it was a request from the Tsars to Madame Clicquot for her to invent a champagne glass or to recreate a champagne glass to show the clarity of her wine, since at the time she alone knew how to get the sediment out of the bottle. So the shape was said to contain the effervescence or continue the gas in the glass for a long time to keep the bubbles or the pearls going. Now, for any serious champagne drinker or for any true champagne lover, it is a bit of a fault because you can't actually get your nose in the glass and you can't get the full extent of the bouquet of the champagne. It was actually Charles Heisig's brand ambassador, Willem, who said that drinking champagne out of a flute is like going to the opera with earplugs in. The third glass that I'm going to discuss is the tulip. Now, there is no statement or exactly where this glass was created, but it's possibly a collaboration on many parts. Many producers prefer, a white wine glass or a burgundy glass, especially for those more prestige cuvées. But the tulip glass is a more modern adaptation that is recommended by the Comité Champagne. So basically, the bulb shape encaptures the effervescence, but still pronounces the bouquet and allows the wine to develop in the glass. So this is the new normality for champagne. And to me, I cannot really fault it. This particular glass is my favorite, and it is from Le Man, which is in Reims, and it's a glass blower. These tulip glasses are by far my favorite to use. So the last and most important glass is this glass. And this is a glass for only the most serious champagne drinkers. It's Dean's glass. Now what you'll need for this is an entire bottle of champagne and a glass that will hold it. Santé.